And now, a Native Podcast with Matt and Zach. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Hope it's a wonderful, terrific day wherever you are at. Hello, I am Zach with Matt and Zach, a Native Podcast. Here we are today. We're getting in the hang of things. This is what, number 3, I believe, of our podcast here. And we plan on going weekly from here on out for a while. So we're going to get on into that. But as always, I'm going to start this off, Matt, buddy. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, doing pretty good. Just looking forward to summer here, like lots of adventures, lots of things planned. No real big trips for me, but I'm going to spend a lot of time out in nature and get out to some powwows and Indian country. And, so always looking forward to that.
Right. No, exactly. It's getting exciting. We got some big things coming up this summer. You and I both have talked about. Heck, we were on the powwow trail this last spring, even doing what we're doing. No surprise to anybody. Today we are talking about treaties, and we will get into that, the supreme law of the land. But I heard you have some factoids for us to get the episode started off, and I'm very curious. What are those factoids, Matt, buddy?
Yeah. The first one, I don't know if you knew, but I guess June 2nd of 1924 was when Native Americans became United States citizens.
Oh wow, that's coming up here as we're recording these ahead of time. Wow, June 2nd,
June 2nd, 1924.
1924, we became citizens.
Right.
So
And
next year, 2024, that's 100 years. We haven't even been in our own homeland. We've been citizens 100 years. That's good news. So no, I'm glad that actually 100 years, that is a good something good to see. But it's kind of shady, and that's what we're going to do today too.
Oh, I know. It spurs the thought though, like did they even give people a choice? Did they want to be part of it? Like, right. Oh, here you're just did they even ask like if they wanted to,
Exactly.
I just find it comical, like when you see these dates and these facts,
Oh, it's wild. Well, because what is it, like in the 70s we became like we're able to vote actually, and
right.
some of those wacky laws too that
Well,
like,
and then
there's some outdated even today, like in Billings, Montana. And it's kind of shitty, growing up as a kid, like we got into it. Like I had kids say like, oh, 3 or more natives walking down the streets considered a war party, we can kill them all. And it's like, that's fucked, but it's also fucked that laws like that are still on like the Montana record. Like
well, there's still small towns throughout the West where they have things that people don't, that they're so remote that people are not aware that some of these laws exist that are very racist, that are very prejudiced, still.
Right. No, exactly. It's crazy. And it kind of it's interesting because it stems from today's topic, and today's topic's a big one. It's a big can of worms. It's the Native American treaties, the Indian treaties, kind of the 368 of them they've said, that 400 plus I've heard, kind of the numbers that you get thrown out with how many native treaties there are between native nations, confederacies, groups, tribal entities. Certain different tribes are tied into the same treaties. That's what allows them different rights. When I look at it, there's 4 basic rights: as education, housing, healthcare, and land. When you throw land in there. So definitely some things that we'll talk about here. But I first wanted, I was reading on the national parks this year, 2023. They did an article, "The Struggle for Sovereignty: American Indian Activism in the nation's capital." 1968 to 1972, the Trail of Broken Treaties.
Mhm.
And here's the introduction. Inspired by the civil rights movement at home and the third world movements abroad, newly empowered and organized Native Americans embarked on new campaigns for Native American rights in 1972 called the Trail of Broken Treaties. The demonstration brought caravans of Native American activists from the West Coast to Washington, D.C. to demand readdress for years of failed and destructive federal Indian policies. Although the campaign was ultimately overshadowed by the activists' week long occupation of the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, and the negative press that resulted, the activists themselves remained steadfast in their objectives. These objectives were outlined in a 20-point position paper that establishes an agenda for Native American rights struggles in the years to come. So it's kind of interesting when you think about that, because like we're going to these powwows. That's about 50 years ago. You look at like Montana State, Montana here, they're some of the oldest college powwows in the US, right? And being able, since the 70s, being able to exist, Stanford being in its like
Right.
50th year, Gathering of
Yep.
Nations in its 40th, so it's interesting, right? So you had like certain things, and I always hear it, Reno in the back of my head, professor I had, she's always saying the new battles are fought in the courtroom, and that's right, because it's these rights that these treaties promised us,
Right.
um that gave us, that really honed in and shown us what we as native people have rights to, because arguably the biggest definition of a treaty is it's the supreme law of the land. It trumps anything else, because that treaty is an agreement between the federal government, the United States as a whole, as an entity with that tribe or that sovereign nation. Um,
I think just to add in too, I think a lot of misconceptions with non-natives with treaties is like I'm a lot of them, their mind just goes, "Oh, that's just for taking the land," or "That's
right,
just related to the land." When you mentioned it is the housing, the education and the medical, right? So
right,
when the activism of the 60s and 70s, a lot of them went to DC to protest the bad living conditions on reservations was
well,
their main, you know,
and that's
issues.
exactly it. They when you talk like when we talk those basic rights, right, like the housing conditions, that's part of those treaties. You said we would get housing,
Right.
healthcare, and school education, right? So that's why you see things such as IHS, right? Indian Health Services, which is a division within Health and Human Services, HHS, um, and it's for Native American tribes and Alaska Native people that are federally recognized, and how it takes care of those. And it grew out of the treaties established in the late 1700s, early 1800s, right? So you got IHS, you got housing, which housing right now, when you look at it from a modern day perspective, kind of gives you, there's a housing improvement plan that's available for Native Americans, as well as the Section 184 loan program, which it makes it really affordable for Native Americans to buy homes. There's also really good tribal housing for veterans, if you look into it as well. um, you have to do your research, get involved with the right programs. They're out there. I
Mhm.
know for 184, it's growing. There are the people who get into it. And I know that's a big topic, and I know we'll get into it.
Right.
Uh, but essentially, like take that for example. The how 184 works is the Office of Loan guarantees within the HUD's Office of Native American Programs guarantees the Section 184 home mortgage loans made to Native borrowers. The loan guarantees assures the lender that its investment will be repaid in full in the events of foreclosure. The borrower applies for the Section 184 loan with a participating lender and works with the tribe and Bureau of Indian Affairs if leasing tribal land. The lender then evaluates the necessary loan documentation and submits the loan for approval to HUD's Office for Loan Guarantee. The loan is limited to single family housing, 1 to 4 units, and fixed rate loans for 30 years or of less. Neither adjustable rate mortgages nor commercial buildings are eligible for 184 loans. Maximum loan limits vary by county. Click the link below, and there's some great resources. HUD has some good resources. There's people in different regions. I know I worked with a guy in the Portland region for that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I
You look
spent
at
some time
basic.
looking at it, and there are, there's different, based on the housing market, they go off of the common costs and some calculations, so they adjust based on what state and area you're living in, so.
Well, not only that, but then we talk about education and the fact that like you have tribal colleges as well as like BIA or BIA school, BIE schools, right? BIE,
BIE, yeah, yeah,
BIE schools, yeah, BIA, yeah,
yeah.
all the acronyms. That's another fun topic. All the acronyms. No, so you have
Well,
the
technically, BIE's under BIA, but yeah. It's
but you know what I mean. The federally
exactly.
run native schools, uh, some of them started out as boarding schools, and we all know that tragic history, and we'll get into that tragic history one of these days. Not today, but it all stems from all this stuff. No. But you look at like that. So those, and even look at like the tribal colleges and how they have um grown. Like I want to say I saw there's tribal colleges now offering doctorates, you know, and a lot of them started off as just 2-year colleges,
Right.
getting just associate degrees. So to see the growth of these programs because of what people have fought for, and that's the thing, right? Is people also think natives just got these things through treaty rights. No, it's the people who are every day in the courtroom, like I'm saying, fighting for these rights to make sure they're upheld, that these things are being allowed and established and funded properly. You take IHS and how it's funded through census numbers. So if you get that, like involved, you see the numbers and how that affects. You see how the numbers don't add up because there's more natives than what the numbers say. So
Right.
the IHS is underfunded and creates some of the issues that you see there. But there's also historical issues as well because of how the federal government refused and has dishonored these treaties. I think when we also talk treaties, some of the first few things that I came to my mind were talking about the definition, and I actually came across the Milwaukee Public Museum,
Oh, wow.
and they had a really good definition. It's kind of long here, but you and I can discuss it here, uh, kind of when I finish. But to understand what treaty rights are, it's first important to understand what a treaty is. A treaty is an agreement between two sovereign powers. When Europeans first made contact with the Indians, they usually, although not always, treated them as sovereign, independent nations, much like European nations such as France, Spain, and Great Britain. European countries made treaties with Indian tribes principally to cement military and political alliances to make peace. Prior to their contact with Europeans, Indians did not use written treaty agreements when they made alliances or peace with other tribes. However, they did have formal conferences whereby oral agreements were made. Usually, wampum belts were used to finalize the agreement. Wampum belts were made of white and purple shell beads woven into specific patterns, often in the form of a picture. Belts used to finalize agreements between Indian communities would have images of two people shaking hands if the agreement was to form an alliance. If the agreement brought about peace between warring tribes, such as peace pipe, might be woven into the belt. And those belts too. I mean, I want to say that's regional, most likely to the Great Lakes, kind of New York. I feel like the Iroquois Confederacy. Not all tribes did this. So I do want to make that be clear. But that's a symbol. That's a sign. That's a sign that these societies have. It's interesting because that's not, that right there is not a, to me, even the Milwaukee Public Museum right now is taking this, and they're not using that correctly because the wampum belt is a sign of like a signed treaty or agreement. You know what I
Right.
mean? It to me, when you look at like our artifacts and our culture like that, those elements, it's no different than like you would say like a Bible or a treaty for that matter, right? And people don't understand that. So I'll continue. When whites arrived, Indian and European customs merged. When treaties were made, Europeans and Indians would hold councils, come to oral agreements, and then written treaties and wampum belts were used to finalize the treaty. The United States used these same conversations in its dealings with tribes. The United States made its first treaty with the Delaware in 1778. The last treaty to be made was in 1868 when the policy of making treaties with Indian tribes ceased after 1871. The United States instead used formal agreements between Indians and the federal government as a replacement for treaties. So that's kind of the now. The reason for this was that many white Americans believed that Indians, while still retaining much of their sovereignty, were no longer independent nations in the same sense that the nations such as the United States and other countries were. Moreover, treaties only had to be ratified by the Senate in order to be approved. The House of Representatives wanted some say in the process, even though formal agreements replaced treaties in 1871. Congress agreed that all treaties that had previously been ratified would continue to be honored by the United States. So that, and we'll talk about this later, but that's kind of how the little shell art whole argument and thing goes back to. So there's all these different treaties stuff. Um, so here's here right here. So then you get into the land purchase. This is still the Milwaukee, the land purchase and reservations. The United States used treaties principally as means to purchase lands from Indian tribes. When treaties were made, the Indians often asked for specific provisions to be written to them. Often these provisions stipulated from certain material items that the Indians were to receive from the United States in exchange for their lands. For example, when the Ho-Chunk ceded their lands in southern Wisconsin to the United States in 1829, they received $18,000 a year for 30 years, 3,000 pounds of tobacco, and 50 barrels of salt for 30 years, and an
Oh,
immediate gift of $30,000 in goods such as rifles, blankets, and cooking utensils at the Treaty Council. The United States also agreed to provide a blacksmith shop for the Indians at Prairie de Chun for 30 years after the treaty. Other treaties signed between the United States and tribes contained similar provisions. Most were for a limited duration, rarely exceeding 30 years. Tribes also requested that other kinds of provisions in treaties when they sold their lands, they often wanted to retain a portion of their original holdings for a permanent home. These lands would then be reserved for them at a later use. These are called reservations for this reason. Some Indian land reservations were created for Indians after the treaty system ended in 1871. These reservations were created in other ways, but like reservations created under treaties, they belong to the Indians and are protected by the federal government. So, kind of just saying like that was an example of one, and how there were other things attached that were unique to the situations. Um, which makes sense. You would see that you get these lands, you get this chunk, you get that chunk. The problem is they would always come back and want more. You know,
right,
you
right.
give a mouse a cookie, you give a white man some land, he's going to want some. And that's essentially it. Um, and that's kind of what happened, and then the reservations were set up because they were part of that tribal land at that time, especially out west. When you look at where the US was at during the Industrial Revolution, right? And that's even why the treaty system was ending, right?
Yep.
Was because it was starting to say, hey, we're not going to recognize you anymore. You're not in these same type of communities. You're not the same kind of problem
Right.
that we saw you as the past. And that's their words. That's the US government's words. They
Oh,
call
yeah.
this the Indian problem, right?
Hey,
So
I have something to add in with,
yeah,
and this is, you can look this up too, which shocked me a little bit when I found it out, but it doesn't surprise me. So when they first put natives on reservations, right? they had related to this was the Dawes Allotment Act,
Right.
which which for the viewers, that is what parceled out, like, I'm just going to use Pine Ridge, for example.
Oh, exactly.
If you watch Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, if you've ever seen that movie, it highlights the Dawes Act very, very well, and
Mhm.
how like the male head of each family got so much land, like
Right.
that's on the reservation, like it's a little square, right? Essentially.
Well, and it's interesting too, because then you see the buyback acts that happen after that, right?
Mhm.
The and when you look at, I guess, really when you look at the history of man, and even where we're at today in modern day, uh, which is where people are moving everywhere in the US, it seems like right now. But it's just like every big thing happens because, oh, we ran out of land, we need more land, we need more land, we need more land, that's where we're at. The South wanted more land, so therefore they opened up the West and the Oregon Trail, uh
Right.
after the Civil War, right? And then that also helps gets an economy. Why do you think we're going to space right now? Land.
It's very strategic, like the timing of it too. You talk about like it makes sense, like on their end, like how they're trying to, like how do we, make this group of people do this, and then we get something from it.
Right, exactly,
You
no,
know?
exactly. Well,
Um, but yeah,
um
I was gonna continue a little bit if that's okay.
yeah, totally fine.
The Dawes Act, essentially, like I'm just referring to the Plains region.
Right,
It really was pushing for Native men to become farmers,
right,
which outside of arguably maybe the Mandan and a few small groups that did cultivate some crops,
right.
we're hunters. Like,
No,
never farmed corn before in our lives.
no, and that was, I mean, you talk about the bison, and that's going to be a whole episode of its own, is just the
Another one.
decimation there because of what just happened. Um uh and just how these treaties, they seem like they gave a lot, they seem like you're getting land, but even today, just the complexities. So that's why, like, when you break down, I say the modern treaty rights, the four basic rights, really the three basic rights, really education, housing, and healthcare.
Right.
uh those become, those are some of those fundamental ones. Those are the, I believe, some of those rights that were guaranteed.
Those are like the core, like what you're getting from this,
Well,
what.
especially when you say you want to take the native out of us and make us white, and you want us to practice your religions, your educations, your health policies. You know what I mean? You can't practice our medicines. We have to practice your medicines. We
Right.
can't practice our languages. We have to practice your languages, right? We can't live in our teepees. We have to live in your houses. We have to own lands. We have to have a white picket fence, right?
Right.
All that was what was being forced upon us. So now in today's modern day, it's what's owed to us because you wanted us to have it, and you said
Right.
you'd give it to us. You said
Right.
we'd have it. So here we are.
Yeah.
Um, that was that I like the Milwaukee's definition there. Um
I
and-
like that you use that example too of like
right,
with the Ho chunk, right? Just like how that might play out with a group of people.
right.
And those small things will differ from tribe to tribe. Like they wanted what'd you say, blacksmith and tobacco and some other things as well. But
Right. So like
um,
here's so when you talk about like modern day, like kind of using the rights, right? So same kind of area. In 1983, a federal court used these canons when it handed down an important decision that ensured that the Ojibwe would be allowed to exercise their off-reservation rights. The court did not give the Wisconsin Ojibwe the right to hunt and fish on their ceded lands. It only had confirmed that they reserved those rights in their treaties, and that the state of Wisconsin had been wrong to impinge upon these rights. The Oneida have also been successful in affirming these treaty rights. In 1996, a court decision confirmed their rights to fish in Duck Creek, one of the reservation boundaries. Wisconsin argued that the west bank of the creek was the reservation boundary, and thus the Oneida were not allowed to fish the creek without a license. A judge in Green Bay overruled otherwise, stating the Oneida could fish on the creek's west bank, free of state interference, which is very similar in the sense of what you get with the Fort Laramie Treaty
Mhm.
and the fish, the hunting, the bison at Yellowstone Park in modern day, and why Coville and Warm Springs and whatnot can come hunt bison in Yellowstone Park, and they hunt them by the hundreds. Little Shell Montana tribe, we only get two,
Right.
and not only that, the park kills off like 2,000 a year
Yeah.
on their own. They kind of manage their own herd because they're overgrown, and they can't, like, you let tribes that they're not even using their full numbers. They're not getting all 100, that they get. They're not maxing out their tags all the time. So why can't some of those other tribes, why does it have to be a lottery for us when we clearly were doing that here in Montana? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Well, why do some tribes get more than others?
right.
Oh,
Well, and
I
why,
just a question.
we can't help that on our traditional lands in eastern Montana. One, that we don't own them anymore, and two, that you killed all the bison. So on the state lands and the public lands out there, you can't hunt bison on them because you're not letting them be a wild animal out there. Why can't we hunt them in the places that you're killing them off anyway?
Right.
Did you know there's a new native apparel company?
No, I did not.
It's called Shop LS 574, named after the 574 federal tribes and the Little Shell descendancy of its founders.
Wow, that's really cool, man.
It is. It is becoming a spot to order native apparel by and for natives, working with native designers and teams to help best represent Indian country.
That's awesome, dude.
For sure. Now make sure to go pick up some Native podcast swag as well as other native gear while shopping at shopls574.com.
Oh, yeah. And do not forget to use code ANP10 to save on your next order.
That's ANP10. Hey Matt, did you know there's a tribally owned net company?
No, I did not.
Not only are they tribally owned, but Blue Ribbon Nets also creates totally sustainable products. With Blue Ribbon Nets, not only are you getting quality nets, but even eco-friendly ones as well.
That's awesome, dude.
It sure is indeed. Make sure to use code RUGAROO10 on your next Blue Ribbon Net order to save. Again, the code is RUGAROO10, RUGARU10.
I am definitely getting a Blue Ribbon Net now.
Tune in every Tuesday to hear your favorite native podcast.
That's right. A Native Podcast has new episodes every week, ranging from boarding schools to Indian child welfare.
Not only that, but we have Indian country covered from Maine to California and Florida to Alaska, Hopi to Blackfeet and Choctaw to Tlingit, and all those Crees in between.
And all you other natives and non-natives out there, we want to remind you to tune in this Tuesday to A Native Podcast.
Is your Res Runner in need of new lights? Well, look no further than our friends at Oxteo, an industry leader in LED lights. Make sure to use code RUGAROO on your next set of lights. That's RUGARU.
And now for music on A Native Podcast with Matt and Zach. And this week, a heartbeat drum song by Eulalie.
Magcitamui ang pigiri, magcitamui khans bewaebi, magcitamui ang pigiri, magcitamui khans bewaebi mampiwa khokahinong dahon tani gaitai iwe meitai nankaya muni ewajite nankaya muni ewajite. kainao kahondani kaitai iwe meitai nankaya ya muni ewajite nankaya ya muni ewajite Mampiwa hokainao dahondani gaitai iwe meitai nankaya ya muni ewajite nankaya ya muni ewajite nankaya ya muni ewajite.
But that's a bigger conversation, and that's kind of one. I mean, we'll talk about the crow example. I have that example here later.
That'll be a state relationship with tribes or something along those right kind of conversation.
Well,
and it plays out so differently with states and tribes than with the federal government with tribes, you know.
But to me, we, you know, as a sovereign nation, you know, the states aren't sovereign nations. They're nation states.
Right.
You know, but they're not sovereign nations. The United States is a sovereign nation representing the states, right?
Right.
Whereas like tribal nations are sovereign nations, we should ultimately be like that, and that's where it is. Why you get the definition, the supreme law of the land, right? Where these treaties, it is nation to nation, you know. So it makes sense, but it also is interesting because then you get like state tribes, state recognized tribes, and that's the state recognizing them as a tribe. But I think really it all comes down to money in the end when you look at like where the money's being handed out. The other definition I really like to use is the Columbia Tribal Interfish Commission. They have a good definition of treaties, and I'm going to read that here for you. Treaties are legally binding contracts between sovereign nations that establish those nations' politically and property relations. Article 6 of the United States Constitution holds that treaties are the supreme law of the land. Treaties between Indian tribes and the United States confirm each nation's right and privileges. In most of these treaties, the tribes ceded title to vast amounts of land to the United States in exchange for protection, services, and in some cases, cash payments, but reserved certain lands, reservations, and rights for themselves and their future generations. Indian treaties have the same force now as on the day they were signed. Like the Constitution and Bill of Rights, treaties do not expire with time. The trust relationship between Indian tribes and the United States government is well established in law. The reserved rights of the tribes have been litigated many times, even going before the Supreme Court on several occasions beginning in 1905. Some frequently asked questions. Is a treaty. In return for the vast Indian holdings and resources, the United States made certain promises, and these promises are protection for Indians from attacks upon their lands. This protection included legal assistance, healthcare, education, some money, sovereignty and religious freedom, confirmation and protection of certain rights such as self-government, fishing and hunting rights, as well as jurisdiction over your own lands. It is important to remember that these promises were made in honor. Also, they were and still are legally binding upon the U.S. by Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. What does trust responsibility mean? Tribes have a unique status in the American system of government. They are neither foreign nations nor exactly like states. Tribes are distinct political communities defined in law as domestic dependent nations
Right.
In its 1831 Nation versus Georgia decision, the Supreme Court decided the obligation of the United States to tribes as that of a guardian to his wards. Subsequent court decisions have made it clear that the agencies of federal government are not to be held to the most stringent. Oh man, I'm going to butcher this word. Fiduciary, FIDUCIARY, trust in parentheses standards. With respect to salmon, it cannot be said that federal agencies have always met their trust responsibilities. What is the citizenship status for tribal members? Tribal members have dual citizenship. They are subject to tribal laws, and authorities can exercise sovereign rights reserved at the time their treaties were enacted. All tribal peoples since 1924 have also been citizens of the United States, subject to its laws and authorities, privileges, and rights. Many tribal members have particularly distinguished themselves in wars with the United States that they have participated in. In general, tribal people exhibit great respect for this land and their fellow American citizens. It was partly in recognition of tribal people's courage and valor in defense of this nation that American citizenship was bestowed, not as a replacement, but as an addition to tribal membership. Indians have been called super citizens. Are they? It's a common misconception that Indians have special rights because of their race. This is not the case. Indians are individuals, do not enjoy any special privileges or rights. Certain rights, such as hunting and fishing, belong to various Indian tribes, not because they're made up of Indians, but because they were sovereign nations who signed treaties reserving rights to self-government among other reservations and conditions. Hunting, fishing, and gathering rights are known legally as usufructuary rights and are the property rights, retaining rights to minerals on the land when it's sold, or as in some states, retaining the rights to frail for pecans or the rights to airspace after the land is sold. All are of similar nature. Property rights such as these are enjoyed by all of us and are not a special right of Indian people. What rights do Indian tribes have to natural resources? In their treaties with the United States, Northwest tribes not only reserved the land for themselves, but also the rights to determine the use of that land and its resources. On reservations, tribes set land use codes and regulate hunting, fishing, grazing, mineral developments, and water use. Tribal rights to resource to use it extend far beyond reservation boundaries. In treaties, tribes reserve the rights to hunt, fish, gather roots and berries, pasture livestock on non-reservation lands. Many places where tribes possess these rights are on ceded lands on the millions of acres they gave to the United States in exchange for reservations and other rights and guarantees embodied in treaties. The tribes also retained rights to fish at all usual and accustomed places that outlie outside the ceded areas. Resources right together with tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction are basis for Indian cultural and economic sufficiency. And that makes sense why it's kind of worded that way, because this is the Columbia Tribal Interfish Commission, so it's talking about fishing. So it makes sense. So what they're saying is you're going to see tribal people fishing at times possibly that Oregon citizens can't fish on bodies of water like the Willamette River or the Columbia River.
Well, it's funny you just said that, and I'm glad you highlighted the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission.
Right.
And they're unique in a way because they're 4 tribes. They're the Yakima, the Warm Springs, the Nez Perce, and the Umatilla. And so basically, all those dams that went up on the Columbia River, I live in Portland, I'm pretty close to that. And just a few days ago, actually, they closed recreational fishing for salmon on the Columbia River.
Oh.
It might go till the middle of June, which is when the spring run kind of starts ending for Chinook. And I was actually maybe planning on going out here one of the next 2 weekends. So if I wanted to, I could go on the Willamette, but the main stem of the Columbia is closed. And that actually benefits the tribes in their treaty, because if the runs are smaller, it gives them more of a chance for those fish that come upriver, with their netting and their dip nets even too.
Well, and people don't realize that there's still a lot of tribal people living that like subsistence way of life. Now I know it's not completely off the land, but that elk in the freezer or those salmon in the freezer really do add up, especially when you talk like some of these communities that we're forced to live in. Because these treaties, when they talk about like why we signed them and what they guaranteed, part of that was to stop the raping, the bloodshed, I really like that scene in the series 1883. Well, I don't like it, but I like how it paints the picture, where you have the Wyoming guys basically killing the native people in their homeland. The men are off doing whatever the men are doing, and they go and kill the women and kids, and that was such a common occurrence. It was these greedy white men coming out west. I get it, they survived the Oregon Trail or whatever, they roughed it to get where they're at, but they took the land that wasn't theirs. And ultimately a lot of these treaties came from want to stop this. I mean, there was people back in the day that didn't, warriors that did not want these treaties signed. You take the Little Shell tribe, for example, and the fact that we didn't necessarily sign our treaty. In the Little Shell tribe, which I really like on our website, gives a nice definition here, kind of how that occurred.
You guys do a good job of highlighting the history, because it is, with you guys, it is kind of a unique type of treaty in a sense too.
So here's the history, right? So the tribe has been state recognized in Montana until 2019. The National Defense Authorization Act, which signed into law on December 20th, 2019, granted the tribe federal recognition. The Little Shell Band of Chippewa Indians are part of a historical Pemina Band of Chippewa Indians, first recorded by European settlers in documents of the Hudson Bay Company, Fort Garry in the early 18th century. These logs and diaries show the Ojibwe held approximately 63 million acres of land throughout what is now South Dakota, North Dakota, and Canada, as well as eastern Montana. By the early 19th century, many French-Canadian men, mostly fur trappers, had married into Ojibwe families. The Pemina Band entered into a treaty with the United States in the 1863 Treaty of Old Crossing. Because remember, you got to remember what was going on in the 1860s, right? Got to remember that.
Right.
Go back in history, right? Why are we signing these treaties? They signed it together with the Red Lake Band of Chippewa in the 1892 McCumber Agreement between the Turtle Mountain Indians and the Commission. The Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation was established, but the Little Shell Band of Chippewa Indians refused the settlement there, and that's considered the 2 cent agreement, where Chief Little Shell himself wanted $1 for that land.
Right.
Based on the McCumber Agreement. Some of the Little Shell Band members did eventually settle on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. Others migrated north and west to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and later made their way back into Montana. And then our history. So that was kind of us with that one.
Well, I have to make a little joke here, and as a Lakota, I might dispute that South Dakota land claim a little bit.
Hey man, you're from the Nebraska side.
I had to say it. I'm not doubting North Dakota, Montana, Canada, but that part of
but when you look at like even just like the regions of Native Americans and how we travel as Native Americans, even in modern day.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
I would argue you look at like your Bismarck, Rapid City, your Bismarck, Rapid City, Billings areas, right? Those kind of trading centers that they were, those crossroads that they were, that you would get people from those tribes interacting in those areas. Like you would see a Little Shell member down in Rapid City trading down there in the block. You know what I mean? Because they have it there.
Well, and that makes sense when you look at like the travel in the plains. Like people moved so much in the plains, and that's why you saw the Sioux even over by Billings in eastern Montana sometimes.
So here's a documentation. Look it up in the Lewis and Clark archives in the journals, right? There is one of the members of the Lewis and Clark journey. He has a like hatchet handle that he is engraved on, he is carved on while they are camping at Fort Mandan in North Dakota, a trading center, one of the larger trading
That was a big one.
posts historically for thousands of years, right? There's evidence of it. Okay. Well, when they are in the Columbia Gorge later that year, there is a native of Northwest native with that axe handle.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It's in their journals. Okay.
Right.
That's that. Other cool fun facts. HHS, Health and Human Services. I really do like this one. I do think they have a really good definition, I guess you'd say, or fact sheet that of treaties. That's good to go to, good to reference. A treaty is a contract between nations. Nearly 400 treaties were signed between Indian tribes in the U.S. until 1871, when Congress passed a law, 25 U.S.C. 71, that prohibited the federal government from entering into additional treaties with Indian tribes. This law did not repeal any existing treaties, stating that no obligation of any treaty shall be hereby invalidated or impaired. The Supreme Court held in Lone Wolf v. Hitchcock in 1903 that the treaties with Indian tribes may be broken by federal law, and Congress has broken many Indian tribes in this fashion. The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provides that Congress may not deprive anyone of private property without just compensation. The Supreme Court held Indian treaty rights are a form of private property protected by the Just Compensation Clause. Therefore, although Congress may abrogate a break an Indian treaty, it must adequately compensate the tribe for the value of any rights or property that are lost. See Shoshone Tribe versus U.S. 1937, Menominee Tribe versus U.S. 1968. It is important to note that money often provides little compensation to the people who have lost their homes and sacred lands. For example, the Supreme Court awarded the Sioux tribe more than $100 million in compensation for the loss of the Black Hills, their prized sacred lands, which have been guaranteed to them in a treaty. A federal agency may not break any Indian treaty without specific congressional authorization. States may not break Indian treaty rights, so states can't do that. Existing Indian treaties have the same force and effect as federal statuses, such as violation of an Indian treaty is a violation of federal law. So yeah, if you break, that's also where you get in trouble on a reservation. It's federal, and that's why there's issues, because you have to bring the FBI in different cases and different organizations and entities, which people don't want to do, and it's hard to do, and those jobs are hard to fill, and there's so many different issues there, and it's crazy, and it all stems from all this BS. You know what I mean?
This is why, I've seen the amount of tribal law programs at colleges pop up, and
right
of natives go into legal work is that is, like you were saying earlier, that is our battles, that's our warriors in a sense now doing that kind of work for us.
You take land, just land alone, and this is a resource I found on the Forest Service website, right? Was treaty rights on National Forest System lands, right? Here's kind of what they cover: grazing rights, hunting and fishing rights, gathering rights, water rights, Alaska Native subsistence rights, trust responsibilities, natural environmental policy act, basically keeping the environment good. All those different things. That's just the Forest Service. That's one entity of the federal government, and how that is involved, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And the different complexities within that. I want to look, when you look at some modern day examples, we talked about one of the modern day examples is the Crow tribe. There was a guy, Herrera v. Wyoming. He was hunting in the Bighorn Mountains, the Crows' traditional mountains, forever and ever and ever. The Bighorns, you go down there, they're so beautiful. They're both in Montana and Wyoming. He shot an elk on the Wyoming side, but he is a Montana resident. So he went to Supreme Court in 2019, and they affirmed his rights, and they affirmed the tribe's rights. But Wyoming is fighting it because who Wyoming is. A little bit of background. In 1968, the United States and the Crow, or the Abzaliga, signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie. In this treaty, the tribe ceded a large piece of its reservation land to the United States. However, tribal leaders reserve the right to hunt on those lands, even though they are no longer part of the reservation. This is also why they can hunt buffalo in Yellowstone as well. I believe they're one of those tribes. In 2014, Crow citizen Clavin Herrera and other tribal members went hunting on the Crow reservation. They followed a herd of elk from the reservation into the Bighorn National Forest, where they shot and killed 3 elk, then took the meat back home to help provide food for the winter. Subsequently, the state of Wyoming cited Herrera for illegally taking an elk in the Bighorn National Forest in Wyoming. Despite the off-reservation hunting rights that have been promised to the Crow tribe since 1868, Herrera was found guilty by the state court in Wyoming. The state appellate court affirmed the lower court's decision, and Wyoming Supreme Court denied the review. The Wyoming courts also declined to allow NARF and ARF's clients and the Crows tribe to file briefs.
Wow.
Herrera petitioned Cetorari CERTIORARI to the U.S. Supreme Court on October 5th, 2017, and NARF's client, the Crow tribe, filed an amicus brief on November 9th, 2017. In January 2018, the Supreme Court requested the views of the Solicitor General on the case, and on May 15th, 2018, the United States filed its brief recommending that the court grant the petition and hear the case. The petition was granted June 21st, 2018. And then they have the case filings. And then May 9th, 2019, U.S. Supreme Court affirmed that the tribe's treaty rights remain in effect. Despite I'm trying to see where it says that here in the article, because it kind of jumps and it's like it goes into like their quotes, and it's like, ooh, I don't know if you heard that thunder, but it's thundering outside here right now.
Oh, again.
But basically, like they're protecting the Crows' traditional hunting rights, and it was affirmed.
He ended up winning that case.
Yeah, that's what it's saying. Yeah, exactly. So that's what happened. I mean, that's a modern day example. I don't know if you have any.
There's a lot of cases. I know there's a lot of stuff with Indian child welfare at risk right now, and that's a whole nother episode right there.
Well, that kind of falls into like this, but as well as its own entity, what has evolved from treaties.
Right, and it's from the treaties, that's tribal sovereignty, and then it becomes more on the individual level. That one's very like layered with a lot. There's one thing I think of too that happened. This has happened to maybe any or most Native people even that I know, is you take your tribal ID card and try to use it somewhere. I know in college we throw them around at the bars and during that time, but people are ignorant that legally, because we are from sovereign nations and those ID cards are federal level, legally, tribal, military, and state issued ID are supposed to be accepted. Now, a lot of people deny tribal IDs, and they're not supposed to.
I've got it denied a few times, and you're right, and it almost stems to a topic of racism at some point. But it's also on the federal government too to, hey, give the tribe, if you want us to all have real IDs, give the tribe the machine to make the real IDs and let them help. Not only that, but it's like, let's help create a job on these tribal lands or reservations or communities, wherever that may be, right? But let's also help the state out who's struggling, or the government out who's struggling, because you have those private DMV companies. So why can't we help, authorize other people with like driving tests, IDs, right? You can register your car to the tribe. Why not register, go through the tribe to register through the state even too? Why does it have to be so difficult,
And I really personally love I know you're a big fan, you're a license plate guy, but tribes getting their own license plates is really reasserting our sovereignty, and designing them and making them really cool looking. Hey, like, I'm proud to be from this nation,
And but like what I like too is like the tribes that are doing it, it's like register the car to the tribe, but don't ever have to pay registration again. Why go through you bought the car once, you've given the paperwork, you've done all the right process. Why do you need to keep doing it?
Right.
You
Hey,
uh,
I could do mine and never have to do a DEQ test ever again.
but take the money. Like the tribes deserve the money. Let them do it. Let them do what they want with their tribal system. We are sovereign in that way. Yes, I get we're complying with the state as well as the U.S. federal government as in that sense, but that's why they're regulating those businesses or helping regulate those entities. Another kind of modern day example, Matt, right here I got for you
Uh-huh.
is other tribes have been frustrated in efforts to secure what they believe to be their legitimate treaty rights. The Menominee argue that their land cessation treaties guarantee their rights to hunt and fish on their ceded territories. But in 1996, a federal judge ruled that the tribe reserved no such rights during a treaty negotiation. Moreover, the Menominee chiefs who negotiated the treaty were not led to believe that they had done so. This is key because even if the treaty did not specifically reserve certain rights, they may still exist if the Indians who negotiated the treaty were led to believe that such provisions were included in the treaty. The Menominee are currently deciding whether they want to appeal the decision in the case. Lack of knowledge about treaty rights have caused great deal of misunderstanding among non-Indians, particularly the off-reservation hunting and fishing rights of the Ojibwe. During the 1890s, whites in northern Wisconsin held emotional and often violent rallies to protest the Ojibwe's reserved treaty rights. The rancor has died down during the 1990s, but the smoldering resentment still exists. They have even been calls in the last 20 years for the federal government to ban all reserved treaty rights of the American Indians. This has not happened and will not happen as long as the U.S. government continues to recognize treaties that it has made with the Indian tribes and uphold them as the supreme law of the land.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. I know just on the ID card, I know there's been issues too with voting booths where they
That
wouldn't.
was the whole address is right because a lot of
Yeah.
natives, even on their North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, especially a lot of those rural places, just had a PO box on my like Montana ID,
Right.
and
They wanted that physical address or something, right? So
exactly. But some of the tribes, especially North Dakota, stepped up and really did a good job with like just printing out addresses for people and printing out cards. Kind of lastly, to kind of close up the treaties, if you have any other questions, make sure to shoot us email at gng.net. That is G as in garden gnome, N as in Nancy, G as in garden gnome at gng.net. Matt will happily respond to you. If you have any questions about treaties or any other topics, or if you know a guest that we should interview and have on the podcast, please send them our way. But I wanted to share some resources with you guys. When I was doing some research on this, some of the research that I've known about, some of these archives and places I've known about, if you're looking at native treaties and want to get pointed in the right direction, the U.S. Department of Interior has a good article on respecting tribal treaty rights, helping preserve the Indian country progress that came out in 2016. The Library of Congress has some good research guides in the law library. They have an American Indian Law, a beginner's guide, and it kind of talks about treaties as well as all the different resources that the Library of Congress can lead you into. For example, I kind of was clicking around and I came on the Indian land cessations, and it has all the different maps of just the different land cessations. You can browse by date, tribe, or state or territory, which I really thought was cool because then I can like look at the different maps. I pulled up Montana and it's crazy to see what happens and how it happens. The Indian Law Resource Center is always a good resource. I found the Central Michigan Clark Historical Library had some good definitions and good understandings of treaties, and especially the Michigan related ones. The Oklahoma State Library also has a good treaty documentation and library as well. The Yale Law School has a good treaty library. I believe it has a link to all the Native American treaties, as well as the History channel. They have a good article, Broken Treaties with Native American Tribes Timeline. And they have a timeline that came out in 2020 on their website as well, that, they helped me when I was looking at treaties. The Smithsonian has some information, as well as just when you do research, you can look at your specific tribe and its treaty and certain treaty rights that, you may be entitled to, that you didn't even know about. So it's kind of cool to dive into that histories,
I'm glad there's all those resources and like the Yale one you're saying, having all of them, really.
Right, you can click a link and go to them and figure them out. I mean, they document 384. That's where or 368. That's the number. I've heard 384. I've heard 400 plus as well. So because there's other treaties out there. There's even treaties that happen that we don't know about in history, just based on history, right? And there's treaties that did happen after the fact because they didn't like other treaties that we don't even know about. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy.
I also recommend, like, off of what you just said, for our viewers, you're doing summer traveling and you're traveling through a reservation, or like hitting your local tribal museum.
Right.
It's always a good way to get those like small details that get the tribal historian's perspective as well.
Right.
Some of those that, like, they know about the 1 cent treaties and these smaller things that you don't hear about always in history too.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Matt, that's kind of all I have about treaties, kind of a brief 101 little episode for you today for the listeners out there. And we appreciate you guys for listening this far. Again, go ahead and email us at gng.net or gng@gng.net if you have any questions, topics, whatever, something you want to say to us. Let us know. Just want to say hello. Write Matt Buddy a poem or a love story. He loves those. But I just want to say thank you guys. Matt, do you got anything here at the end you want to chat up?
Oh, I think the treaties are very kind of foundational to understanding like who we are as indigenous nations, as sovereign nations today. The 500 and was it 67 now? Is that right?
574.
574. I'm dyslexic or something. 574. And I just reading about some of these state tribes, I wouldn't be surprised that we hit 575 sometime soon. So yeah, I mean, this is I remember sitting in, this reminds me of my federal Indian law courses I took, and the domestic dependent nation was like burned in my head. When you brought it up, I'm like, wow, that's like the 500th time I've heard that said.
Right.
But it is like, it helps me remember like who we are in that regard, the definitions and stuff. So.
Well, exactly. And it's good to just know, because, there's so much just jargon out there. So much just, random stuff people say, just things they claim about natives that's untrue, not true. You know what I mean? So it's good to hear it right. It's good to hear it from us, from people who do the research, who want to do the research, who care about, educating properly. As a reminder, we do this for free. This is out of the kindness of our hearts. No, we love it. This is something fun to do. And we want to do this just to educate and to promote Indian country in the positive manner that it deserves to be promoted in, because we as Indian people have been shit on for too long, and it's just like something that we don't need, and we just need to educate people properly. Here's an example episode on some treaties, so we hope you learned something, and until next time, bye-bye.
I know ballers, I know chiefs, I know riders from the east, I know educated natives down to picket in the streets, middle fingers to police, fuck you, we come in peace. I know red-skin hippies that be giving me the creeps. I know beauty, I know beach, I know savages and freaks, and I know a couple cousins even bougier than me. No, ain't elite, bougie native, yes indeed. Art exhibit to the club, and we roll it 20 deep. Copper on my neck, Gold on my ring, feather on my hat, skin stitched chin. 100 warriors on my back, they be drumming when I sing. Man, there ain't no way around it.
A Native Podcast is produced by G&G Advertising and Quartz Lake Productions.